So I'm Mark Davies. I got my doctorate back in 1992 in Spanish linguistics from University of Texas at Austin. I taught at Illinois State University for about 12 years, Spanish linguistics. Came to BYU in 2003, and so I've been here for about 14 years now, and I teach primarily corpus linguistics, which is using large collections of text to analyze language, historical linguistics, English grammar, a few other fields as well. So what got me interested in linguistics was I had kind of a rotten attitude, I guess, when I was a teenager. I had no interest in foreign languages at all, just none. I thought, well, if someone speaks a different language and they want to talk with me, they can talk in English. I mean, really bad attitude. And then I went on my mission and learned Spanish, which obviously is pretty similar to English, but just the fact that I learned one other language kind of opened my mind to, wow, language can and does work differently than it does in English. And so then I came back to BYU, started studying Russian, started studying Chinese, Hebrew, Greek, playing around with different languages. And for me, the really cool thing about linguistics is it just gives me insight into the way that the brain works, how we process language, how language works in society, which are things that as a teenager I never really thought about. So I think one reason to study linguistics is, and I'm sure you'll have other members of the department who will use the same quote, but Goethe, the German philosopher, said that a person who knows only one language doesn't really know their own language. It's only by looking at other languages and what they do that's different from English that we say, there's variation here. And so if all we're doing is looking at language just through the lens of English, we're seeing a very, very narrow view of what's possible in language. I mean, when you start studying Chinese or Native American languages or whatever, you see that the way that they describe and segment, divide up reality is so very, very different than the way we do it in English. My dad, he had a doctorate in psychology, cognitive psychology, and I've always, because of that, I think I've always been interested in how is it that the brain works. And linguistics, I think, gives us a great insight into how and why we process information the way that we do. So I think just from a theoretical standpoint, that's one of the really cool things about linguistics. So I'm a corpus linguist, and corpus linguists use corpora, large collections of text, to look at language in kind of a natural setting. So not what should be happening with language, but what are people actually doing in spoken language, in fiction, in academic, in newspapers, magazines, different genres. So I'm really interested in variation across genres. Why is the language of let's say, academic English so different from the English of fiction, and why is that different? Even newspapers, the language of newspapers is really different from academic English or even magazines. Why is that? What drives that? What are the functional reasons? Those are some of the types of questions that I look at with corpus linguistics. So part of what I do as a corpus linguist is I create these large corpora collections of text, and I've received large grants from several government agencies, National Endowment for the Humanities, 4 different times, National Science Foundation, a couple different times, to create large corpora of English, Spanish, Portuguese, historical English, web-based English, and so on. And so these corpora are all available on corpus.byu.edu. And believe it or not, I know it's hard to believe, but these corpora are actually used more than any other resource, electronic resource at BYU, more than Learning Suite, more than all of the library resources. They're used by about 150,000 different people each month from all over the world. They use it for researching language, they use it for teaching and learning language. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, if you ask them, if they're in Germany or China or whatever, and you ask them about BYU, if they're at all familiar with linguistics, chances are they're going to be familiar with the BYU corpora because they really are used a lot worldwide. So one of the cool things about the corpora is they allow us to see how language is being used in a social context right now. And so there's a corpus I've created called the Now corpus, News on the Web, that has about 5 billion words, and about 5 million words are added each day to this 5 billion word corpus. And one of the cool things you can do then is you can look at words and phrases like fake news. You can see when and how this began to be used. Or you can look at, for example, what are people saying about refugees in the United States or in Europe? How is it that we view refugees? And so in this sense, language ceases to be just this theoretical construct. It deals with what we're really saying about things out in the real world right now. So why study linguistics? And not study nuclear engineering or nursing or whatever. Those are great fields, but one of the really cool things about linguistics is that it's a great kind of mix of something that you can get as theoretical as you want, but at the same time, language, which is what we're analyzing, is something that surrounds us and that we're using every day. So this isn't something just abstract, nuclear physics, that we don't come in contact with. Every day, every minute, we're using language, but it's so much deeper, so much more complex. There's so much happening at a subconscious level that we're not even aware of. So it's that fact that we can get really deep and really theoretical, but it's something we're dealing with every single minute of our life. For me, that's what makes linguistics so fascinating.